In what turned out to be a dry Miami Grand Prix after some much speculated rain, the race offered us the viewers with some much needed entertainment and for some of the teams and drivers some motivating and also crushing realizations. Miami turned out to be a race where some of the teams and drivers must have thought, hang on a minute, things are starting to look much better than we actually thought. Things might start going our way. But then for some, it was a crushing blow of reality, where increasingly the results aren't happening and things aren't going according to plan. However though, it did feel that this was the best Miami Grand Prix yet. It seems like the organisers have found a balance between style and substance and delivered something that wasn't as cringe as previous years. But overall, thankfully, it was a Grand Prix that gave us lots to talk about. So while you're there, sit back, relax, settle down, and let's get into the good, the bad, and the ugly of the 2025 Miami Grand Prix. So once again, I've got to kick off the good section with none other than Oscar Piastri. After muscling through from 4th to 1st place after overtaking Max, he wasn't really threatened and drove a very commanding and committing race. And this is just what happens when you get a rocket ship of a car combined with sublime talent. And he's also built up a sizable championship lead thanks to his 3 wins in a row. And by the way, he is also the first McLaren driver to do this since Mika Häkkinen from Jerez in '97 all the way through to Australia and Brazil in 1998. And stats like this show that if McLaren decide that they want to try and wrap up the Drivers' Championship ahead of schedule, should they throw everything behind Oscar Piastri or try and keep it open for Lando Norris too, but risk lengthening or making the Drivers' Championship harder to win than it actually could be? But overall, this cool as a cucumber attitude that we've seen from Oscar has served him extremely well. And whilst I still think that Norris is fractionally faster over a single lap, I sense that over the last 3 races, Oscar has shown that he can grab a race by the horns, make it his own, and win conclusively. So if Oscar can sort out his qualifying, 4th place on the grid was a bit of a hiccup, but with the car he's got, he should really be starting from 2nd at least. So if he can sort that out, I have no doubt that he is probably the strongest candidate that we've seen so far for the 2025 Drivers' title. And as always, let me know below in the comments if you think otherwise. Okay, now with next up on the good list, it is none other than Invisible George, aka George Russell. And once again, after appearing to be doing absolutely nothing during the Grand Prix, he's found himself on the podium. And whatever he's found or discovered about himself this year, about him and how he drives the car and everything, something clicks, something's different about Russell this season. And it seems that the best way for George to get noticed and create buzz and an atmosphere about himself is to be doing and saying absolutely nothing. The strategy is to qualify well, the green light, he disappears and then reappears at the checkered flag in a podium position, or close to it anyway. Now at the Miami Grand Prix, it appears he didn't really do anything, but under the microscope, I think it was a bit more tactical than that. Early on, he didn't really put up much of a fight against Lando Norris when he overtook him, perhaps knowing that that wasn't his race, that wasn't his fight. He had a good strategy, he was pretty easy on the tyres, and there was an excellent strategy call during the whole yellow flag virtual safety car pit stops, which plopped him really into 3rd place. Mercedes pit stops were a bit wobbly, of course, but that didn't really affect the results. So perhaps now from George and Mercedes front, there's kind of an acceptance that they're not going to beat McLaren and Max Verstappen on race pace alone. However though, they can beat them on just sheer, downright strategy and intelligence during the race. And moving forward now, George is well on for 3rd place in the driver standings and will have to fight tooth and nail against Max to hold that position. But honestly though, if he keeps doing what he's doing with a bit of Mercedes brain power and strategy sprinkled on top, 3rd place in the Drivers' Championship should be his, as well as 2nd in the constructor standings for Mercedes, as well as hopefully a contract extension for good old Invisible George. Now my next choice here in Max Verstappen may seem like quite an odd one for the good section, but overall, given the circumstances that he found himself in, I think he put in quite a good shift. In a car that on paper doesn't really stand a chance against the McLarens over race distance, once again, he proved that it's the driver that can make all the difference. After all, he did start from pole, which does show as well that the McLarens do lack something still over single lap pace. And Max followed this by making life quite a lot harder than it should have been for Piastri and Norris when it came to overtaking, delaying their inevitable overtakes for as long as possible, and in Norris's case, for a lot longer than it should have been. And it kind of reminds you years ago from when Max was really the only guy capable of putting up a fight to when Hamilton and Mercedes were running the show. He was unlucky, of course, as well with the virtual safety car, yellow flags, and pit stops where arguably this cost him a podium and also that position to George Russell. But what I sense this did show is that Max, I know he can be quite vocal on the radio and everything, that he is the ultimate professional. Of course, his daughter was born that weekend, and that didn't seem to affect his performance on track or his approach a single bit. Honestly, you never would have guessed anything had happened, but just given the circumstances and everything, his result, I think, at Miami is extremely commendable. Although it wasn't his best race, and he's probably quite disappointed with the result overall, what he pulled out, I think, was pretty good, I think. And so now my final choice for the good category is Alex Albon, who pulled off a fantastic 5th place finish from starting 7th and defied everyone's expectations, showing Williams and the entire F1 fan base that he could get the better of his more decorated and experienced teammate Carlos Sainz, who started ahead of him. And not only that, but early on to hold his position and not get swallowed up by potential faster cars such as the Ferraris. And you know what? Right now, Albon is really showing signs that he is a man on a mission. You can just see that he has this clear vision of just showing Williams that he is the spearhead of the team and he's not going to be pushed around by more experienced teammates or anyone else on the grid for that matter. And although we had these doubts about him at the start of the season, he's overriding all of those at the moment. And with that, it's great that Williams have now developed a car that can quite happily sit in the healthy end of the points, and Albon's clean and confident style can take full advantage of this. He wasn't fazed at all by Carlos Sainz being ahead of him to begin with. And now if you look at the points, Albon is quite happily sitting in 8th place, which is pretty much best of the rest in terms of drivers. Sitting there behind both McLarens, both Ferraris, both Mercedes, and Max Verstappen as well. And it's worth mentioning as well, that is over 3 times the points that Carlos Sainz has been able to muster this year. So, in my book, that is not bad at all. So now that the good section is over, we must turn towards the dark side and look at the bad of the Miami Grand Prix. And I'm kicking this off with a man who I think lost the most over this Grand Prix weekend. This was Lando Norris. After all, starting from 2nd place on the grid with only Max Verstappen to dispatch and his main rival Piastri crowded down in 4th place, you'd be excused to say that this was Lando Norris's race to win. All the signs show that this was the race where he was going to pull everything back in his direction. However, though, a costly overtaking attempt on Max early on caused him to drop back down the order, and by that point, the man he had to keep an eye on, Oscar Piastri, was long gone. So overall, it's a bit of a weird one because he did drive a very good recovery race, clawing his way back up to 2nd. He did waste a lot of time getting by Max Verstappen when he came to him, and I think had he got by sooner, he might have stood a chance at getting a bit closer to Oscar Piastri. But by the time he did get past, any chance of a win was gone. And so there is no denying really that this weekend was a loss overall because the points gap between him and Oscar Piastri has increased again. And this, I sense, is where mostly the problem lies because Norris seems to be much more susceptible to these kind of setbacks and struggles than Piastri is, for example. And so moving forward to Imola, he really has to pull things back in his direction and his advantage straight away and secure that win. Otherwise, it could be seriously bad news for Team Norris and championship hopes, of course. Now, my next choice, this might seem cruel given that he's a rookie and everything, but my next choice here is Kimi Antonelli. Now, for some reason, Antonelli seemed to click with the Miami circuit very, very well this weekend. Much, much better than George did anyway. He found time where others couldn't and really showed that he is up to snuff as a driver and really is meeting expectations at Mercedes. So on this basis, I think it's safe to say that Kimi Antonelli has passed his probation period at Mercedes. He's a proper driver, and having started from 3rd and dropping down to 6th place behind his teammate Andrew Williams, he is going to be quite disappointed with that, as will Toto Wolff, I think. And especially on a circuit which seemed to suit him, and he had the car and also the ability to finish higher, or at least 1 place higher, than he actually did. So looking at this just through the lens of a rookie driver, this was an extremely good result considering where all the other rookie drivers are. But for a driver like Antonelli who wants to go places and win championships and all that stuff, he will, I think, see this as a disappointment, but also a massive learning opportunity as well, which I'm sure he'll do and take forward to a massive Grand Prix for him at Imola in 2 weeks' time. Now, next up is another conflicted one, and a guy who is still, unfortunately, trying to find his feet in a new team, and this is Carlos Sainz. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it hasn't been a great start for Carlos at Williams. However, it has slowly been getting better race by race from what we can see. And this is really a shame because the Carlos which we all hoped that we would see at Williams has had a really tough time coming online and adjusting to a whole new way of doing things at Williams compared to what he did before at Ferrari. He qualified well in 6th, but the fact that he couldn't convert that into a 6th or higher place finish will be bugging him, and to drop all the way back to 9th place whilst his teammate Albon came home 5th is going to be really seriously on his nerves. But fair play to him, he almost did get Hamilton right at the end, and given the circumstances of why both drivers are at their respective teams, that would have been absolute F1 theatre had that happened. But despite everything, I do kind of wonder if Sainz is starting to lose his patience at Williams. Is the frustration starting to show? You know, has he underestimated the situation, or even is this season at Williams going to harm his market value or even his ability to get a top seat later in his career? A number of people prior to the season were saying that Sainz will surely leave Williams after a single year. But now, 5 or 6 races into 2025, the question is, who would take Sainz, and also why as well? And then race by race, is there this growing feeling in Sainz where he knows that he has no choice now to make this Williams thing work, because the chances of Ferrari or Mercedes or Red Bull or whoever knocking on his door are getting slimmer, or is almost impossible? Guess we'll just have to wait and see. Now, my final choice for the bad category here, and one that I think is pretty obvious as well, is Sauber. Because in a race that had retirements, yellow flags, virtual safety cars, Sauber and Hülkenberg were not able to do anything, and it was all down to him as well because Bortoleto had retired from the race. And I think this is starting to look very worrying for Sauber, because not only is this their last hurrah as a team in Formula 1, as Audi is taking over next season, it looks like that they have absolutely no chance of scoring any points at the moment. Now, after the Australian Grand Prix a while back, I saw this hot take where someone said that Hülkenberg's 7th place is going to be the only time Sauber are going to score any points this season. And it did sound crazy at the time, but as the races have gone by and from what we've seen, that actually seems quite plausible, to be honest. So unless there is a chaotic race where they can score points, whoever you are who made this hot take, fair play. You might have got it right there. So I'm not going to linger on Sauber for too long, and although they were sporting a livery, again, which was far better than their regular one, the fact that there was a race that had all these variables and they were just unable to convert anything, there was no strategy, tyre wizardry they were able to do just to get anywhere near the points, is extremely worrying. And if I was sitting now in a boardroom in Stuttgart with Audi people discussing the team, I would be extremely concerned for 2026. So for Sauber, not good at all. But unfortunately now it gets worse, because we have to fall into the dungeon of despair and look at the ugly of the Miami Grand Prix. And my immediate choice here, with no hesitation, has got to be Hamilton and Ferrari. Now, although both Ferrari and Hamilton have their enormous amount of fans, there are no innocent parties here. Both of them are guilty. Now, to begin with, Ferrari, they were conducting their strategy with the same thought, care and urgency as required in a scam Indian call centre. Whereas Lewis Hamilton was dramatising and broadcasting his views to the world like a, and I'm going to say this, like a petulant child. What we saw at Miami with Ferrari and Hamilton going at it over the radio again and again, it was the same kind of thing as you see when a married couple have a full-blown argument in public. It's ugly, it's vulgar, and it is just downright painful to watch. Especially coming from two renowned parties such as Hamilton and Ferrari, who really should know better by this stage and know not to conduct this stuff publicly and sort it out behind closed doors. And that's just it, because you felt that they could have solved this whole thing behind closed doors in private. But it felt like Ferrari and Hamilton both knew that because the world was listening, they could try and trigger a reaction which will pull the result in their favour at the expense of the other. Hamilton was trying to publicly save face, and Ferrari didn't want to accept the blame, basically. Whereas poor old Charles Leclerc was just getting on with it, as always, with a broken soul from all these years at Ferrari. And so, yes, it was an enormous cock-up from Ferrari to have this indecisiveness when it came to the switching between Hamilton and Leclerc back and forth, and all the hesitation regarding that. But for Hamilton to air his grievances like that in public, and by the way, it is his right to do so, he can do whatever he wants, but if he is going to succeed at Ferrari, like everyone wants him to, including the shareholders, that sort of thing is not going to want to do him any favours. And it's when we see things like this, it just pours more fuel on the fire that this whole tie-up between Hamilton and Ferrari simply may not work. And it could just be down to being the wrong personalities in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was ugly, and it's getting increasingly difficult to see how this relationship is not only going to recover, but also work moving forwards. And now, moving on to a team that would quite happily have taken Ferrari's finishing positions is Aston Martin. Now, I've talked in previous videos about the absolute state of Aston Martin right now and how there's really no signs of improvement or anything, so I'm not going to repeat myself. But in 2025, it just feels that we are presented with this zombie Aston Martin, which coincidentally is also green, with Alonso and Stroll finishing 15th and 16th, plumb last. This is a team that appears to be dead without consciousness or thought, but still seems to be able to walk around and function, hence the zombie Aston Martin term. After all, Alonso is still yet to score a single point, and if Aston keep this whole thing up, they're going to be replacing Williams at the rear of the grid, or where they would be normally anyway. But the thing is, if other teams are in this situation, I have no doubt that there'd be endless things to the press talking about how we're going to do a self-assessment, we're striving to improve, there's upgrades on the way, all this sort of stuff. But for some reason, absolutely nothing seems to be coming out of Aston Martin at the moment. Definitely nothing that faces these poor performances head on anyway. But then again, perhaps it's tactical. Perhaps it's better to say nothing than just spout out these PR bingo words about the poor performances. You know, kind of setting yourself up for promises that you are just inevitably going to break and not deliver on. But from what we've seen so far, what I'm sensing is that this is a team that has troubles that go far, far deeper than what we see on the track. It goes right into the fibre, the tiny little areas of this team. And even the times where we see Alonso do interviews where he says he's not bothered by this whole thing. Either he knows that Aston are building an absolute starship for 2026, or he just doesn't care anymore. And I really hope it's not the latter. So overall, an immensely odd and strange situation for an immensely zombified team that don't really seem to be alive at the moment. Now, next up here, 2 for the price of 1, that's how thoughtful I am, is Jack Doohan and Liam Lawson. 2 of the most under pressure to perform drivers on the grid right now, and both gave zero evidence to show that they are improving at any rate. So starting with Jack Doohan, and given that Miami was race number 6 for him, there really is a strong indication, I think, that this could be the end of the road for him now. Flavio Briatore has been extremely vocal about Doohan since the start of the season, and this isn't helped by having the much anticipated but still somewhat unproven Franco Colapinto standing by. And as we all know, to save his seat before the European leg of the season, Doohan really had to put in some heroic performances. And what he's delivered so far, 2 DNFs with a best place finish of 13th, in Flavio's eyes, that really is not good enough. And so with that, I really would not be surprised if there was an announcement that either this week or next that Alpine and Doohan have parted ways. And in fact, it may have actually already happened, it's just not announced yet, but as we know, with Alpine and Flavio, this is just how tough F1 can be sometimes. And now with Liam Lawson, I sense as well that this is another driver whose time in F1 could be coming to a premature end. His DNF ending and very uninspiring race for him raises the question of what Red Bull's plan is for the future, and even if Lawson is going to play a part in this. And as we all know, Red Bull are quite happy to replace their drivers willy-nilly at the drop of the hat. And if Lawson keeps getting outperformed by his rookie teammate Hajar, then you kind of do wonder if he's going to be in Formula One next year, or let alone by the end of the season. After all, Racing Bulls or RB, they must be aiming for 6th place in the Constructors' Championship, but with them currently sitting in 8th, they are going to need both drivers at the top of their game at every single race. And right now, with Lawson, they are just not getting this. So overall, my assessment is that this is the end of the road for Jack Doohan, and this is another one of Liam Lawson's 9 lives gone. And so that's it. That was the good and the bad and the ugly of the Miami Grand Prix. Do let me know your thoughts below. Have I missed anything? What would you change from what I've put down? Guys, thank you so much for watching. Sorry that it's been so long since the most recent video as well, of course, but I'm going to do much more of these moving forward. Thank you so much for your patience. Anyway, please be sure to like, share and subscribe. I'm Paul, and as always, I'll see you later. Cheers.